The views and opinions of the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the position of the management and staff of Guardian Network.
Good morning and welcome to Guardian Radio AM. Today is Tuesday, September 5th, and it's a little after 11 o'clock in the morning. Once again, this is C.A. Newry, and I shall be your host for the day as we talk history. Today we actually have one of the premier historians in the Bahamas in studio, but not just an ordinary historian. No, he's a different type of historian. Even though he majored in history at COB, way back then, he is a meteorologist historian who give history about hurricanes happening in the Bahamas. Now we can put all that in context because we have storms traveling, right? We have a hurricane out there and I need to know what we should be doing now, and we would be having conversation on what happened then. I happened to I showed my guests today a Bible entry. I'm not sure, at least everyone should be familiar, older people know that on the Family Islands, and of course Nassau too, they had a family Bible. And in this family Bible, they recorded births and deaths of immediate family members. And in 1933, a storm, a tempest, if you will, traveled through the Bahamas and killing about 20 members of my family in Auckland, Bendigo Hill there. And I want to recant that story from a historian base and also recant one or two stories from other family islands that had serious storms, because I know Abaco had storms. And with that, I want to remember the people of Abaco and Grand Bahama, because September 1st, was it?
1st and 2nd, yeah.
1st and 2nd was a day of infamy in the Bahamian history regarding hurricanes. And without further ado, I would like to welcome my guest, Wayne Neely, and thanks very much for agreeing to come on the studio with me to discuss hurricanes and the history of it and families, basically.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. It's good to be back here again.
It's always good to see you. Let's start with this. Let's start with your credentials. You did history?
Yes, I did. I grew up in South Andres. I came from, of course, I came from South Andres. Went to the best school in the Bahamas, South Andres Senior High School. We called it SASH back then. I graduated, and my two favorite subjects were geography and history. And I was at a crisis point in my life. I wanted to decide where I should go with geography or history in terms of my career. And the options were limited back then, and I decided my father was a principal and a teacher. My aunt, I had like about 4 or 5 aunties who were teachers actually. I had 2 uncles who were actually principals, teachers as well. So the choice was simple for me, become a teacher. And I started at college at Bahamas as a teacher, majoring in history and geography, social studies actually. And the problem back then was that COB registered you based on your surname. So those persons with Ambrister, with an A name, they would get in all the good courses. And by the time, almost 2 years, I was basically finished all my major courses. I went straight into the college class without the college prep. And by that time, most of the education classes I hadn't done. So the guidance column recommended, look, you might as well change your major to history or geography and go either one of them. I said, if you do history, you could become a lawyer. And if you do geography, you could become something else. But the options were limited. But I decided, I just so happened while I was at COB the last semester, there was a gentleman by the name of Roger DeMerit who was a meteorologist at the time. He came there at his careers day and he said, look, why don't you come to the Department of Meteorology and make use of your geography? And I went, he brought me a form, I filled it out. And next thing you know, the rest is history. And I'm a meteorologist with a specialty in geography and history. And history is my major. If you read my books on hurricanes, I have 15 of them. Most of them will have some kind of history in there. I incorporate my research into that as well.
15 books. I didn't know it was that many.
Yes.
And
My 16th finished the one that finished now is the 1933, which is where your family died. The 1933 hurricane season. That was when we had 5 hurricanes and 1 tropical storm. And I finished writing that book, and right now it's just battling me with the publishers to get it out as soon as possible.
So there's hurricanes traveling. Let's start from
Yes.
there, and then we go back to my
Yes,
family.
it's busy. Actually, this concern as a meteorologist, I'm normally not concerned about typical hurricane season, but this season has concerned me a bit because, first of all, it went against odds, and we, as meteorologists and people in the scientific person in the community, community, we got this season wrong, and we got it wrong for the right reasons. I don't know if that's we got it wrong for the right reasons. Most of the governing bodies for tropical weather outlook, they predicted a below normal season, and the reason why they predicted it because we have the El Nino supposed to be making its presence felt. Now, what happened was that is El Nino there? It's slightly there. It hasn't made its appearance like it should, and like most meteorologists expected it to do. But it has actually, this season, what happened is the warmest on record, unless you're living somewhere on Jupiter or somewhere.
It's hot.
It's hot, yes, it's hot. And it's very hot. It's not just hot locally. We've had the 3rd highest temperature recorded in New Providence, actually in July. And we've had the hottest on record worldwide, and just about every area reported warmer than normal. In Wuhan, I just came off phone with professor in Wuhan. She said they've just broken another temperature record. And
So I'll stop you there. When it's hot, what does that mean?
it means that since 1851, we've been keeping track of record. We've been keeping track of, in other words, as a meteorological body, we have what we call climate. Every meteorology department has a climate department, which compiles that weather data. For example, you might have a maximum recorded temperature recorded today of 30 degrees Celsius or 86 Fahrenheit. And at the end of the day, you document that. And let's say that might be important now, but 100 years down the road, it could be important. You can look at trends. You can look at forecasts. It determines, for example, with certain records, it determines like hurricane activity, determine temperature trends, where it's getting colder or warmer. In Arizona and Texas, they reported record-breaking temperatures, the highest temperature recorded. For example, Death Valley has the highest temperature. I think it's like 138 Celsius or something like that, around there. And it's the highest temperature. It doesn't mean anything just looking by itself, but when you compare it globally and locally and also in group or in time, it plays a significant role. And climate change, which is everyone talking about climate change now, those records and the studies that you get from climate change, the impact, that's actually from the records of the meteorologists, the wind speed, direction, air temperature, maximum, min, and all those things.
Should Bahamians be concerned with the heat index we have now, and when you compare it to yesteryears?
Yeah, it's definitely much warmer. And sometimes I ask my parents how they were able to survive, and I also ask people how were they able to survive without condition in the 50s and 40s and 30s. And some of the reports say, look, it wasn't as hot as it used to. It wasn't hot then like it is now. Mm-hmm. And a lot of those old parents, that's what they tell me, say it's not as hot as it is. But today, I don't know. I can't live without my air conditioner in my car or in my home.
I can imagine. I mean, it's hot.
It's hot. Yes, it is hot, and that hot is having an impact not only on locally. It has an impact on the climate, hurricanes, the weather. We saw the impact that it had on Maui in Hawaii. We saw the impact in Texas and Arizona and those places. And the East Coast right now, they're reporting temperatures that a summertime temperature when it should be cooling off now, and it's not. They're now still having summertime conditions and heat warnings.
Hurricane 5.
Yes.
Category 5.
Yes.
That's not a common thing.
No.
It's a unique thing.
It is very unique.
How many on record that you know of as a climate historian?
We've only had 37 so far.
30? No. I talk about for the Bahamas.
For the Bahamas, there have been 4 on record. We've only had 4, and we're the only country in the region that had that many, other than the United States.
Okay, let me break that down, because
yes.
I feel you. You said that it's on record from 1851.
51.
There's been 35 Hurricane 5.
Yes.
Okay, so we got
37.
37 Hurricane
Yes.
5s. And out of that 37, the Bahamas has experienced
4.
4 out of that 35
Yes.
would have happened from
1851, yes.
1851 to now.
And the reason why you can't go beyond it is because back then they didn't have the instruments, and you didn't have an accurate recording of those instruments. Those instruments never started becoming accurate until the turn of the century. And so
okay. We know we experienced a Hurricane 5 recently with Hurricane Dorian about
Yes.
4 years ago.
Yes.
4 years ago. When was the last time we experienced, other than that Dorian one, a Hurricane 5?
Hurricane Andrew, 1992.
And I vaguely remember Hurricane Andrew because I was young, but I remember it mashing up a lot of things.
It just devastated Eleuthera, especially North Eleuthera, and it's the pivotal storm. First of all, if you missed it, there have been 4. The first one was the Great Abaco Hurricane of 1932. Now, back then, they never named hurricanes after men and women like they do today. That never started until 1950.
I remember reading that about the Abaco hurricane where they said a tsunami came.
Yes, they call it tsunami or tidal wave, and most of the old people, they don't know the storm surge. They call it tsunami. They call it tsunami or tidal wave.
Explain what that means.
It's the same thing as a storm surge. It's okay. Whenever you have a hurricane, there's a bulging effect based on the circulation of the low pressure system, and it creates a bulging effect. If let's say, for example, if you washing dishes and you pull the plug out, if you notice at the center, the water is very low and there's a circle, there's a vacuum or space. That's what you call the eye. Just around that, if you look at that, would be the highest point at that water level. So that point is what you know collectively as storm surge. And that occurs with every hurricane.
So let's go through all the hurricanes again and then briefly describe what happened.
Okay, in 1932, you had the Great Abaco Hurricane of 1932.
And describe what happened then.
It devastated the island of Abaco. At the time, the number one industry was sponging, so most of them were sponge fishermen and turtle fishermen and whatever. And it devastated. It went to Abaco, and it killed 18 persons. Well, some records have it as 16 persons, but there are 2 records actually labeled as have 2 additional persons. But most of them were in Green Turtle Key, Hope Town, and Marsh Harbor. And then you had in 1932, you had the Cuba Bronxville Hurricane of 1932. That was a Category 5. Now, interestingly enough, it was a Category 5, but that was more impactful in the southeast Bahamas. But the major hurricane that did most of the damage was a hurricane also in 1933 called the Treasure Coast Hurricane. And I'm writing the book that I finished now. It's actually just waiting to get released. And it's on 1933. You had 5 hurricanes in 1933 and 1 tropical storm.
In 1933, the Bahamas experienced a total of 5 hurricanes.
One Category 5 and some more Category 4s. Yes.
What happened during that year to cause that? I want to know, what we were experiencing to cause so many hurricanes?
First, in terms of tracking, in terms of the research that I did, it was a La Nina year, a year that we had significant. And there's sometimes when the atmosphere comes in perfect ideal conditions, and which is why now I'm concerned now with 2 hurricanes that I see out there. If there's a hurricane, there's a very possible chance, there's a big chance that you'd get another Dorian-like type storm, because the atmosphere is warm. The atmosphere is much warmer than normal. In Dorian, you had a 2 degrees Celsius difference. Right now, it's way beyond that now with the atmosphere now in the hurricane formation zone. And you also have moist atmosphere, and you have little or no wind shear. And most people ask me, I've been getting calls for last week about these pending storms. Everyone's shooting these models out to me and everything about what the model showing that it's going to come over the Bahamas. And what they're showing is that most of the models have it coming. Most of the models have storms coming over the Bahamas, and which if the models are correct, we stand to be impacted. But I see a Hail Mary out there with high pressure systems that might cause the first one to pass, maybe just due east of us.
So I want to pause you. So this for the listening audience benefit.
Yes.
You've been sent models that suggest that maybe, perhaps, there's
Yes.
a good chance
Yes.
that these hurricanes may pass over us.
Yes.
Okay, I
And-
just want people to understand and
most of
appreciate that.
That's what you do when you look at, you see those different tracks that they have on TV, and all those are what you call, they get it from models, or we call ensemble models or weather models. And they're about 20, 25 or so major ones. The most popular ones are the UK Met and the GFS models.
And they're suggesting that perhaps,
Yes.
more than likely,
Yes, the possibility that one, and then there's one that's just coming off the African coast. That as well
may
has-
impact
yes.
the Bahamas.
And if it does, the conditions right now,
I get into that now. Talk about the conditions.
you have the sea surface temperature much warmer than Dorian. Second, you also have light winds after. There's no wind shear to weaken the storm. Third, the Sahara dust that you have is weighing off. There's no Sahara dust to weaken the storm. So you look at those things. You look at inhibiting factors and strengthening factors. Things that would stop that hurricane from developing, and things that would encourage a hurricane for development.
So I'm going to pause you again.
Yes.
You're saying that some of the models are suggesting that both of these hurricanes may pass over the Bahamas.
Yes.
And due to the conditions that we're experiencing, it
Yes.
suggests that more likely they're going to be bad.
Yes. In other words, everything to encourage the storm to strengthen. Hurricanes are creatures of nature. They're creatures of heat. The warmer it is, they get their energy from heat. They get from what you call latent heat of condensation. And with hurricanes, they thrive on two. First of all, they thrive on warm sea surface temperatures. That's where they get their energy from. And they also get from a moist atmosphere. And right now, the atmosphere, because it's so warm now, the atmosphere is very moist. So you have ideal conditions. In other words, it's like you have a fire, and you have you have a gallon of water and you have a gallon of gas. Right now, they're pouring gas on the fire right now, so to speak.
And hypothetical,
Yes.
if one of these, God forbid, storms pass over us,
Yes.
you're thinking that it may go up to a Hurricane 5?
Yes, it would. It could. And if you look at the last hurricane that occurred, it didn't get much attention that hit the west coast of Florida. It went from a Category 1 to Category 3. And now, looking at some of the models that they are examining now, it could have been a weak Category 4. And in such a short period of time. So, and that's just while I was in the Gulf of Mexico.
So let's go back to the history part.
Yes, good.
We call too. It's 1932, 1933.
Yes.
Give me some more. Okay, you said 5 active hurricane was in
Yes.
1933.
33.
Okay, that's where we are.
Yeah. Then the next one would be Hurricane Andrew of 1992 now. In case you say you're too young to remember, well, there was a storm prior to Andrew of 1930. Andrew was the template storm, the turning point storm for us as a region, for us as at the Met Office, for us as the scientific community. First of all, before Andrew, there were no major real hurricanes out there that gathered the attention and the visibility of the general public and the United States and the Bahamas. Prior to Andrew, when Andrew occurred locally, it was August the 19th. Election had just been, the Honorable Hubert Ingham had just upset it, probably through a time bomb into the history of the Bahamas. He won elections over the Lyndon Pillin. And so they were in celebration mode. FNM was in celebration mode, but the celebration was very short-lived. In fact, I don't think they really enjoyed it because Andrew came along and it devastated the Bahamas, Northern Luttra. And the last major storm before Andrew was Hurricane Date of 1979, and that was just a weak storm. And prior to that, you had Betsy of 65 and Dawn of 1960, but they weren't major. And so Andrew was a major storm. And at that time, you had the media, you had ZNS and everything, they travel, and they all document. And instead of Hubert Ingham cherishing or relishing having parties and I just defeated the former leader, Sir Lyndon Pill, in 25-year reign. He didn't have a chance to celebrate or enjoy.
Straight into a hurricane,
The first thing he had to do, he had to put his bags down, whatever, his party shirt off, take that off, and he had to go up there and go to each island, and he had to comfort the people, and then he also had to make it to get the Bahamas back to some degree of normalcy.
I just had a flashback on where I was in '92. I was on summer break, I think.
Yes.
And I was in Miami, and we were out electricity and water for a couple of weeks.
Yes.
Over town there. So I just saw it now because I remember the election. What category was Andrew?
Category 5. Interestingly,
Andrew's a 5 too?
Yes. Interestingly, Andrew was not a Category 5 when they did that. When they actually, Andrew never became a Category 5 until 10 years later. And an interesting story, and Max Mayfield, who did the foreword for my latest book on Hurricane Dorian, he was the deputy director of the National Hurricane Center. And the director wasn't well. And so when Andrew occurred in South Florida, Andrew devastated Homestead Air Base, it devastated South Florida. Mm-hmm. And it forced them to change the building codes, and which they had to come to the Bahamas to get template of our building codes, yes. And at that time, the last major hurricane to impact the United States was was Betsy of 1965, and Betsy was the first $1 billion hurricane. After that, they had a few hurricanes that had some impact on some part of it. But what happened with Andrew, when Andrew came over the Bahamas, then it went over South Florida. Andrew was so strong that it damaged most of the infrastructure was destroyed in South Florida. Mm-hmm. And the Homestead, it cost billions of dollars to get, it cost the U.S. government $26.5 billion to get it back to normalcy. And that was a record at the time. That was the costliest storm on record. Remember, they featured in National Geographic, all the news organizations, all the environmental organizations, they all featured Andrew, the impact of Andrew. And when that happened, the only station that was on air, and you imagine in the entire United States, was WSVN in South Florida. All those were destroyed. All the other radio stations, their towers were destroyed in Andrew. Mm-hmm. And there was an unknown person named Brian Norcross at the time. He was the local weather meteorologist. And he did the foreword for one of my books as well. And they called him. And so every station, ABC, NBC, CBS, all of the stations fed into his feed. And the station got millions of dollars of just feed from that. And it put his name in notoriety as a meteorologist in the United States. And he broadcast the impact of Andrew to the entire U.S. He got an award from the U.S. government for that. And when that happened, the first thing that they summoned the director of the National Hurricane Center, but he couldn't attend. But they sent Max Mayfield, and Max Mayfield went, and they basically, I don't know if you're familiar with those hearings. Mm-hmm. They say, look, you should be ashamed of yourself. We give you the best money, we give you the best equipment for you to give us a forecast, and you let us down. So the whole country was devastated because of the storm. And he listened to them talk for about 25 minutes, and after that, he said, now that you finished, right? I said, yes. And every single congressman, including Joe Biden at the time, who was also there, and they all basically made him feel small. Mm-hmm. And he said, look, I said, are you finished now? He said, yes, we finished. And what do you have to say for yourself? He said, look, when I submit a budget to you guys, there's an instrument called a Doppler radar. They brought it to the National Hurricane Center, and they said, look, you need to get this for hurricane technology in terms of weather and hurricanes. You turned it down. He said, I have something called a microwave energy that helps with warnings with weather systems. You turned it down. I asked for an airplane to fly into the hurricane or ahead of the hurricane to sample the weather, environmental conditions ahead of the storm, so we know which direction that storm is heading. You turned it down. And now, after you give me subpar instruments, now you tell me you want a top 8 forecast. And he said, you can't, the science doesn't, the maths doesn't add up. So he said, look, if you wanted us with a refined forecast, give us the equipment that I asked for, and you get. And everyone went silent. Say, do anybody have anything to say about that? And everyone was silent. And he said, look, so Joe Biden said, look, so what could we do? Say, get the instruments that I asked you for. So what happened? Within 10 years, they got all those instruments that Max Mayfield requested. No Doppler radar. Nowadays, Doppler radar, everybody hears about Doppler radar. That was technology that was brought into the Hurricane Center. Doppler radar, microwave, most people don't know about that, but every hurricane that goes that's close to the U.S., they send a Gulfstream aircraft ahead of that storm so they can monitor the signs and the conditions of the atmosphere ahead of that storm so they can know which direction that storm is heading. And that's pivotal for hurricane forecasting and track to determine warnings and warning systems. And he did all that. And so what happened, you got a more refined forecast, and they realized that, look, and they went to Andrew and they realized that Hurricane Andrew was not a Category 4 like they had initially realized. When they applied those technologies, they realized that Hurricane Andrew was actually a Category 5. So 10 years later,
they realized how strong it was.
And they realized, this is good. Let's try this with other hurricanes. And they did that. Some of the storms that they found used those same technology that Max Mayfield requested. They went to every single hurricane and something called Haradat. It's a program called Haradat, which I'm a part of. They document all the old hurricanes, and the interesting thing they found out that some storms they found out that when people call them hurricane or Category 1 or Category 2, they found out they were Category 4, Category 5, or they upgraded them in the record books, officially in the record books, and there's some they found out that were not hurricanes and were just tropical storms, and they downgraded them. And one of those affected the Bahamas in the 1933 hurricane season. One they found that the records had 21 named storms, but they found there was only 20. So now the 1933 hurricane season has 20 named storms. Were compared to 21 at one time before they did the reanalysis program. So from that system benefited every country in the region. So now you have more accurate and more refined forecasts. Now, personally, my auntie and my cousins, everybody tell me which way the storm going because the GFS model or the UK model have it this way. They'll ask me which one's more accurate or something like that. But everybody is now a professional meteorologist now.
Yeah. So that's why I'm going to lead to my next question, right? When there's a hurricane that is threatening the Bahamas, tropical storm, yes, when there's a hurricane threatening the Bahamas, right? We have a hurricane watch.
Yes.
We are now betwixt and between whether we should listen to the American report or the Bahamian report.
Yes.
We competent?
Yes, we are.
So I should turn my television and my aim and scope to the Bahamian meteorologist?
Yes.
And why is that?
First of all, for several reasons. First of all, if you listen to a station in Florida, and I'm not active no more on the forecast bench for crazy reasons, but I won't go that yet. But those meteorologists, we are trained by the best. And I can say with 150% certainty, you have the best persons working in meteorology as forecasters. They've been trained by the best. They've been duly educated. They've been working consistently. They've been certified. You can't work there unless you're not certified. And for example, when you issue a forecast, that forecast is designed locally, mandated by law for the Bahamas, and especially Bahamas also and Turks and Caicos, because officially we also respond for the Turks and Caicos Islands for hurricane warnings and others. And when you issue a forecast, for example, if you listen to South Florida say, there's a weather affecting the islands of the Bahamas, the Southeast Bahamas. But if you listen to a forecast from the Bahamas, from Nassau Met Office, or from the weather of Bahamas Department of Meteorology, you will hear the storm will affect Ragged Island at 2 p.m., Cat Island at
Specifics.
yeah. Long Key, or Church Grove, Crooked Island, or Camps Bay, South Andros, or Marsh Harbor, Abaco. You will hear names that you are familiar with and that you can relate to. You cannot relate to a Southeast Bahamas because I can guarantee you where I can put my head on the chopping block and say, if you ask a Bahamian person, and they've been listening to the weather for a long time, name the islands of the Northwest Bahamas, the Central Bahamas, and the Southeast Bahamas, I can guarantee you that 99.9% of the person won't know who they are. And which is why, so when I issue a forecast, I will give the islands.
Yes.
And the meteorologists will give the islands and name the islands. And that's important because if you are in Machutang, if you're in Machutang and Agua, and you hear the weather's coming, it's going to affect Machutang and Agua at 3 p.m. It means that but you'll start to feel the effects from around 11 a.m. It means that, let's say you're waking up, you don't, for example, or even a daily forecast, if the weather's going to affect New Providence by 3 p.m. this afternoon, you know that this is not a good day to wash my car, or this is not a good day to wash clothes, put clothes on the line, or what have you, or whatever plans. There are many times that people were having parties that they called me personally. Mr. Neely, I have a party on Saturday. They will call me from the Monday. Mr. Neely, I'm having a party in South Beach on Saturday. Now, the problem is the tents, I have to rent them out early. The caterers with the food, I have to get them. And if I pay for them, I can't get a refund. So I need to know, is it going to rain on Saturday? The meteorologists in Abaco, the meteorologists in Florida will not tell you that. You can pick up the phone and call a local meteorologist, and you can ask him anytime or any question and lay your fares. You can't do that with a person in WSBN or ABC affiliated in Florida or Charlotte or in Washington.
So let's talk history now.
Yes.
Right? In 1933, Bennecle Hill, Ackland, like I mentioned, about 20 members of my family was washed away.
Yes.
Whilst this hurricane, and you mentioned, I think that was a Hurricane 5 traveling, I'm not sure.
Yes,
remember?
there was 5 of them, yes.
Okay. Whilst the hurricane came, the water disappeared.
Yes.
The water disappeared, and where my family lived in Bennecle Hill was a creek.
Yes.
And they saw fishes all over the place, and they decided to go capture
the fish.
And
conch, yes.
And conquer whatever they saw.
I'm going to tell you a story behind that.
Go ahead.
That was it occurred in July. They had 5 of those storms, and the one that affected your family was the one in July. And there were several of them. But when I first started the research, I've interviewed thousands of persons about hurricanes from 2001 to 2005. Basically, I spent my entire time going to churches, interviewing people, looking for older persons. While the pastor was preaching, I'm looking at an older person to see if he's old enough to remember a particular storm in Abaco or Acklands. And in 1930s, there was a storm that impacted Acklands. And I interviewed the former Governor General, Arthur D. Hanna. And I went and had a talk with him one afternoon, and we talked for the whole hour. Well, he did most of the talking. I was just in awe of his knowledge and his thing. And he talked about a hurricane. He said, look, the hurricane washed all the water out of the harbor. And at the time, I was at the Met Office at the time, and I said, that's strange. I've never heard that phenomenon before. And he said, yeah, it washed. I said, what do you mean it washed all? He said, water just disappeared. I said, the water just gone? He said, yeah, the water just gone. And me and my friends, we went home and started picking up fish and conch of the water. I said, so what happened? He said, we picked up fish and conch, and someone came and told us that we need to come back because the water's going to come back soon. Apparently someone recognized. He said it was a tidal wave. He said, tidal wave, take everything out. And I said, take everything out the harbor. said, yeah, so where the water gone? So he said, I don't know, just gone. And he laughed. He said, and so I said, no, interesting. And I recorded his recollection, and it's in one of my books, actually. And I went there, I said, boy, that's strange. I've never heard that before. And at that point, when I was interviewing those persons, a lot of things that were strange to me, as a meteorologist, I never heard of, and I didn't know existed. So which is one of the reasons why I started writing those books, to record what those older persons said. And in all my books, you'll see recollections of these stories. Mm-hmm. And I include them in my books. And in my case, it was books on hurricanes and books about weather, and I incorporated that into the books. And he said, look, the hurricane went up. So, and fast forward 2017 with Hurricane Irk, and a person called me like at 2 a.m. in the morning from Long Island.
Long Island's have this experience.
Yes. So they said, Mr. Neely, there's no water in the harbor. I said, what do you mean no water? He said, what happened to the water? I said, what do you mean what happened to the water? What water? Said the harbor empty. I walk on the land. He said, I just pick up a conch and I pick up 2 fish. So I said, what water? And I typed it on my Facebook page. And I said, water disappeared. And he sent me, and by the next morning, he sent me pictures. And I put it on my Facebook page. And suddenly my Facebook, people started calling me locally. Then people started calling me internationally. And I didn't realize how many people actually followed my Facebook page. And I got like about 200 calls international, most of the top, Time Magazine, Newsweek, everyone. And I said, the hurricane caused the storm, the water to wash away in the storm, hurricane. And meteorologists started calling me, said, what do you mean the water wash away? Because no one never heard of that. I put it on my Facebook. I said, look, and I put a note of warning. I said, look, because I remember Arthur said, look, saying if they didn't advise us to move to get back in the shore because the water came rushing back. And I told him, I said, look, do not go in the, I said, anybody's out there. I said, yeah, they're looking at the water. I said, tell them to remain, do not go out in the water. I said, because the water's going to come back with the same force it's going to burn out with. And they did. But unfortunately, it was unique in the sense that the water came back gradually.
Gradually?
Yes.
Because this happened at least twice in my recent knowledge of Long Island, where the water washed away and it slowly came back.
And it also happened since then. It happened in Exuma. It also happened in West, where the hurricane touched down. It also happened in Florida as well. And so
that's different from a tsunami, because I've seen movies of tsunami where the water goes out, but when that come back,
it comes back with force. And that's the problem, and that's why a lot of people think, and that's why when I issue warnings for hurricanes, and if they advise you to move, they're not advising you to move, they're advising you to move to save your life. Because a lot of people, I interview people with Hurricane Dorian. One of them was a gentleman, and his wife died. And they said, look, we thought the water coming back and forth. And some cases like in South Beach during Machu, the water came in, and it came in slowly, but it came at a fast pace. It came in very with no force. Now, and that's in New Providence with Machu. Now with Wilma, 2005, it was the opposite in Freeport. Water came rushing back. In fact, a young boy, Matario Pinta, died in Grand Bahama and Wilma, and because the water came and washed the baby. The uncle was holding a baby, and water washed the baby out of his hands, and they never found the baby till several hours later. The storm surge, the force of the storm, the water washed the baby out. Now, sometimes in cases like my cousin, Thaddeus Burrs, who passed away, he was in the house and the water came in. He said came in fast, but not with force. That was in South Beach, but it didn't happen. So it varies. So in other words, so it's better to err inside a caution. And when I did, I told him to avoid that. And when I did, I got calls from CNN, all the major newspapers, Time Magazine, Newsweek. Everybody called me and to do an interview with me.
I wonder, two-part question, but I want us to conclude this Long Island thing.
Yes.
so far, there's several times that the water was washed away from Long Island.
Yes.
There hasn't been any kind of major concern. The water came back slowly.
Yes.
In the future, can we mildly predict that if the water goes again, you don't need to be concerned. It can come back slowly.
No. It doesn't work. It depends several things. There's so much variables in that equation. For example, the direction that the hurricane is traveling at, the wind speeds, the movement of the hurricane, the track, and there's a whole many variables, and that could change, and that could depend on or which quadrant of the storm the island will be impacted by.
Okay, let me ask the next question. Something happened in Abaco in Grand Bahama
Yes.
where the water came on the land.
Yes.
The water took people. I'm not sure if people understand what happened in Grand
Yes.
Bahama and Abaco. The water came in
Yes.
and took, I say, hundreds of people.
Yes.
And because we still don't know how many
No.
people died yet, but
Yeah.
I believe hundreds of people were washed away into the Atlantic Ocean. Gone.
Yes. Go on.
And I need to understand what happened.
They just simply experienced two things. They experienced something called a storm surge, which is what the most people, and that's with every hurricane. With a storm surge, you're going to get increased water. You're going to get, in other words, for example, the gentleman who lost his wife, they saw the water rising, and they went on. First, they went in the chair, then they went on the lady. She went on the bureau. And next one, I think he went on the stove or one of the appliances. And the bureau gave way and she died. Mm-hmm. And in many cases, many people actually, in Grand Bahama, people actually had to go into the roof of the house. Mm-hmm. And some don't think save their lives. Some of them take a hammer and move a piece of plywood off the roof so that they can get out on top of the roof. But it depends on the storm, it depends on the direction, it depends on the speed, the wind speeds, so much variable. But at the end of the day, it's a dangerous situation. And in storm, and with a hurricane, 75% of the deaths are due to storm surge. People think that the deaths are going to be because of the strong winds. No, that's about 20% of the deaths occur because of the wind, but 75% of the deaths is from the storm surge alone.
Mr. Lee, we got to take a quick break here,
Okay.
right? We're talking to meteorologist Wayne Neely. We're doing history of hurricanes, but I see we have a caller here, but we're going to take a break now. Guardian Radio AM with CA Newry. We'll be right back.
The Grand Bahama News is available every Tuesday in the Nassau Guardian. Buy your local paper at Freeport convenience stores, Western Bakery, DeGregory's Fine Foods, and Bellevue Gifts. Want to reach your Grand Bahama customers? Then call Barefoot Marketing at 827-4578 or message them for ad rates via their Facebook page. Advertising opportunities now include classified ads too. Keep up with all the latest Grand Bahama news in the Nassau Guardian newspaper every Tuesday.
Love the show? Want to give your support? Become a sponsor today. Call 302-2300 for our rates and packages. That's 302-2300. Become a sponsor on Guardian Radio 96.9 FM. Fresh news, smart talk, all day.
And welcome back to Guardian Radio AM with CA Newry. I see we have a caller on the line, and we'll bring this caller in so we can continue and wrap up our interview with Wayne Neely. And I need to know about King Tide, because something happened in Yamacraw where land was covered by water, and I want to understand what happened there. But go ahead, caller. Can you hear me?
Yes. Good morning. Listen, Mr. Neely, would you advise, I tell people, especially in Abaco, Grand Bahama, that homes that lives on those banks, there's always flood, is to keep a life raft in your house if you have friends, or the government should invest with the prior house rafts and jet skis, because they're always flooding.
Yes, that's the problem with the Bahamas, unfortunately.
And I think that's what they really should do. And life jackets, keep them in your home. I'd like to hear his response. Thank you.
I'll let him speak. Go ahead. Thanks.
Yes, well, that's the problem with living in the Bahamas. One of the dangers of the Bahamas is that we're a low-lying country, and the problem is, on average, the average height above sea level is about 23 feet, And if you do that for one part, you're going to have to do it for other islands, other vulnerable locations as well. And to be quite frank with you, many of those areas are vulnerable in the Bahamas. And so that's why you have to develop a personal home plan, I guess a community plan, and a countrywide plan as well.
Let me see if I can squeeze in one more caller. Go ahead, producer. Can you hear me, caller?
Hey, good morning, Mr. Newry.
Good morning. I'm trying to squeeze everything in. Go ahead.
Thank you too, and good morning to my schoolmate.
Good morning.
Mr. Neely, question: is there a record of a storm in 1926?
Yeah,
That's Andros in Pacific.
Yes, there were three. Three of them.
I remember my grandmother was telling me that my great grandmother was telling me that my great grandfather went missing in that storm and was never found.
Yeah, there were several boats in Andros. But remember back then in the 1920s, that was the era of the sponging. Most fishermen went out at sea, and unfortunately, it's not like we do now. Back then, we didn't have any radios. ZNS never came out as a hurricane warning station until 1936, the 26th of May, 1936, and so a lot of persons, the only thing they had was a barometer, and many persons went out at sea and not realizing a storm would come. And that storm storm affected many islands of the entire Bahamas.
Let me squeeze this one in again. Go ahead, producer. Go ahead, caller. Can you hear me?
Yes, hello, good morning, Cecil.
Go ahead. Make it quick.
Good morning, Mr. Neely.
Morning.
Yeah, now I was listening to the show, right? And I'm a deep researcher. I want to ask you two questions.
Yeah.
And I would like for you to say yes or no, and then you could do your explanation afterwards. First of all, do they have a machine to create hurricanes, namely HARP? That's number one. The next question is, do they have machine to generate and make earthquake? I'll hang up and I'll listen to you.
Okay. Go ahead.
Not on a massive scale. It's the force that's needed for a hurricane is too great, and they tried to weaken hurricanes a long time ago, but they realized that the force of hurricane and the size and the dynamics of hurricanes are too great to be created, in fact, they tried to get rid of hurricanes.
Okay, let's talk about your book.
Yes.
You have 30 seconds.
Yes, I have 15 books out there. Most of them are at Logos and Harvey Shopping Center. I just, the one that gets a lot of attention, the greatest and deadliest hurricanes to impact the Bahamas. And that includes all the major hurricanes from Hurricane 1500 when the fleet of Columbus ship occurred, impacted by Hurricane Crooked Island, and that takes you all the way to Dorian.
Mm-hmm. And this book you're working on is what?
The 1933 hurricane season.
Yes, and that's where my ancestors disappeared.
Yes.
Yes. Anyway, I'm going to invite you back. We're going to talk more about hurricanes, especially during this hurricane season, just so people get acclimatized on what is happening, especially with the conditions of being hot. And we're being prone to have more hurricanes this year, and it's going to be serious in terms of hurricane category 5. Anyway, Guardian Radio in the AM with C.A. Newry. You have a wonderful day. Thank you very much, Ween Neely. Have a wonderful day.